Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Martin Shepard was reviewing quarterly reports in his downtown office when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. As a successful security consultant who'd spent 15 years in military intelligence, he rarely answered unknown calls. But something made him pick up. Martin? It's Teresa. His brother Edward's voice was barely recognizable, shaking with panic. She's in the hospital. She had a stroke. Teresa, his 24-year-old niece, the brilliant medical student who'd been accepted to Johns Hopkins. Martin's chest tightened. Which hospital? St. Mary's General. Martin, they're saying she might not make it. Within 30 minutes, Martin was racing through hospital corridors, his tactical boots echoing against sterile floors. He found Edward slumped in a waiting room chair, looking like he'd aged a decade in hours. What happened? Martin demanded, his steel-gray eyes scanning his brother's face for details. Edward ran trembling hands through his hair. She was studying late. Her roommate found her collapsed this morning. The doctors, they ran tests. Massive stroke. They're saying there's extensive brain damage. Martin studied his brother's expression. Something felt off. Edward had always been the weaker Shepard brother. Where Martin had joined the military and built a successful consulting firm, Edward had drifted between jobs, always looking for easy money. But this wasn't just grief in his eyes. It was something else. Where is she? ICU. They're not letting anyone in right now, except immediate family. Edward's voice cracked. Martin, I can't handle this alone. Dr. Felipe Cummings emerged from the ICU, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair giving him the appearance of someone who belonged more in a boardroom than a hospital. He approached with the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered bad news countless times. Mr. Shepard? I'm Dr. Cummings, Teresa's neurologist. I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share. Martin stepped forward, his military bearing evident. I'm Martin Shepard, Teresa's uncle. What's her condition? Dr. Cummings glanced at Edward before continuing. The stroke caused severe damage to multiple brain regions. Our tests indicate minimal higher brain function. She's breathing on her own, but... He paused, letting the words sink in. We're looking at a persistent vegetative state. What exactly does that mean? Martin's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to getting straight answers. She may open her eyes, have sleep-wake cycles, but there's no awareness, no cognitive function, no ability to communicate or recognize loved ones. I'm very sorry. Edward broke down, but Martin remained composed, his analytical mind working. Something about Dr. Cummings bothered him. The man seemed almost eager to deliver the prognosis, too quick to write Teresa off. I want to see her, Martin said. Of course, but I should prepare you. I've seen worse. Martin's tone cut off the doctor's attempts at gentle preparation. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed conversations. Teresa lay still in bed 7, various tubes and monitors surrounding her. Martin had seen combat casualties, had held dying soldiers in his arms, but seeing his vibrant niece reduced to this hit him like a physical blow. He pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her pulse steady. This was the girl who'd called him every week during college, who'd sent him photos of her latest medical textbooks with notes like, Uncle Martin, look how cool this brain surgery technique is. Hey, kiddo, he whispered. It's Uncle Martin. I'm here. Edward lingered in the doorway, checking his phone repeatedly. The insurance company called, he said quietly. They want to discuss options. What kind of options? Long-term care facilities. The costs. Edward's voice trailed off. Martin, I can't afford this. And if she's really gone, if this is all she'll ever be. Martin's jaw tightened. She's your daughter. She's not really there anymore. The doctor said a lot of things. Martin's voice carried a warning. You're talking about your child. Edward shifted uncomfortably. I know you care about her, but you don't understand the reality. The medical bills, the long-term care costs. I've got my own life to think about. Your own life? Martin stood slowly, his 6-foot frame imposing. Your daughter is fighting for her life. She's not fighting for anything. She's a vegetable, and I can't spend the rest of my life. Edward caught himself, but the damage was done. Martin stared at his brother with barely contained disgust. Edward had always been selfish, but this was a new low. Get out. Martin, get out. Now. After Edward left, Martin sat back down beside Teresa. He'd make sure she got the best care possible, regardless of what his brother wanted. He'd liquidate investments if necessary, sell property, whatever it took. As he held her hand, planning how to navigate the medical system and secure Teresa's future, he felt the slightest pressure against his palm. He looked down, then at Teresa's face. Her eyes remained closed, her expression unchanged. But Martin Shepard hadn't survived 15 years in military intelligence by ignoring subtle signs. Something had just happened. Something that told him Dr. Cummings might be very, very wrong. Chapter 2. The Note. 3 days later, Martin had established a routine. Every morning at 8, he'd arrive at the hospital with coffee and Teresa's favorite classical music playlist. He'd read to her from medical journals. She'd always loved staying current with research and talk about anything that came to mind. The nursing staff had grown accustomed to his presence. Unlike Edward, who'd visited once more before mentioning a necessary business trip to Hawaii, Martin never missed a day. Nurse Jeanette Vincent, a kind woman in her 50s, often stopped to chat. She's lucky to have you, she said during his 4th-day visit. Most families, well, after the doctors deliver news like this, we don't see much of them. Most families aren't dealing with Teresa Shepard, Martin replied, adjusting the angle of Teresa's bed. She's stronger than they know. You really believe she can hear you? Martin looked at Teresa's peaceful face. I've learned not to underestimate people who've been written off. Dr. Cummings appeared in the doorway, chart in hand. Mr. Shepard, might I have a word? They stepped into the hallway, where Dr. Cummings adopted his professional tone. I've been reviewing Teresa's case with our ethics committee. Given the extent of the damage and the prognosis, we need to discuss realistic expectations. Meaning, long-term care facilities. There are several excellent options that specialize in persistent vegetative state patients. Much more cost-effective than acute care. Martin studied the doctor's face. Cost-effective for whom? For the family, of course. Insurance companies have limitations on extended hospital stays for cases like this. Cases like this, Martin repeated. You mean patients you've decided can't recover? Dr. Cummings's smile tightened. Mr. Shepard, I understand this is difficult, but denial won't change Teresa's condition. The sooner we accept reality. The reality is she's been stable for 4 days. Her vitals are strong. Her brainstem function is intact. Martin's voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone cold. I'm not ready to warehouse her yet. I'm afraid it's not entirely your decision. Her father has medical power of attorney. Her father who's currently sipping Mai Tais in Maui while his daughter fights for her life. Dr. Cummings cleared his throat. Mr. Edward Shepard has been in contact. He's coming around to the practical realities. Something in the doctor's tone set off every alarm bell Martin had developed during his intelligence career. Dr. Cummings wasn't just delivering medical opinions. He was pushing an agenda. That afternoon, Martin returned to Teresa's room to find Edward had returned early from his trip, looking tan and rested. He was speaking quietly with Dr. Cummings near the window. The facility we discussed has an excellent reputation, Dr. Cummings was saying. Very peaceful. Your insurance will cover the basic care package. Edward nodded. When can we transfer her? As early as tomorrow. I'll have my assistant handle the paperwork. Martin cleared his throat. Both men turned, and Edward had the grace to look ashamed. You moving her? Martin asked. It's for the best, Edward said quickly. The doctor explained that there's no point in keeping her here. This place has better resources for patients who can actually benefit from them. Patients who can actually benefit. Martin repeated his brother's words, disgusted. She's your daughter. She's gone, Martin. Accepting that isn't giving up, it's being realistic. Martin looked between his brother and Dr. Cummings, seeing something pass between them that confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just about medical care or costs. There was something else happening here. I need some time alone with her, Martin said. Dr. Cummings checked his watch. Visiting hours end in an hour. Then I'll use that hour. After they left, Martin sat beside Teresa and took her hand. I don't know if you can hear me, kiddo, but something's not right here. Your dad and that doctor are pushing too hard to move you. And in my experience, when people push that hard for something, it's usually not for the reasons they claim. He felt it again, the slightest pressure from her fingers. This time, he was certain it wasn't his imagination. Teresa, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Nothing for a long moment. Then, unmistakably, a gentle squeeze. Martin's heart pounded. Again, one squeeze for yes, two for no. Can you hear me? One squeeze. Are you in pain? Two squeezes. Are you scared? One squeeze. Martin leaned closer. Is something wrong? Something beyond a stroke. One squeeze. Then Teresa's hand began to move, her fingers working against his palm. Martin looked down and saw she was trying to slip something to him. A small piece of paper, carefully folded. He palmed the note and looked around the room. No cameras were visible, but he couldn't be sure they weren't being monitored. I've got it, he whispered. I'll figure this out. In the hospital bathroom, Martin unfolded the note. Teresa's handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. Uncle Martin, not brain dead. Dr. Cummings lying. Dad taking money. Help me. They're going to kill me at the facility. 3 other patients already dead. Can't move much but can think. Trust no one here except Nurse Vincent. They don't know I can write. Get me out. Martin stared at the note, his mind racing. His niece wasn't brain dead. She was trapped, aware, and apparently caught in the middle of some kind of conspiracy involving her own father and doctor. The military strategist in him immediately began analyzing the situation. Teresa was in immediate danger. Whatever was happening at the facility, they wanted to transfer her to had already killed 3 patients. He needed more information, and he needed to act fast. But he also needed to be smart about this. If he tipped his hand too early, they might accelerate their timeline. He needed to make them think he was just another grieving family member while he gathered evidence and planned his response. Martin Shepard had spent his career in situations where people underestimated him. It usually didn't end well for them. He tucked the note into his wallet and returned to Teresa's room, where Edward was back, checking his phone. Everything okay? Edward asked, not looking up. Just processing everything, Martin replied, sitting down beside Teresa's bed. This is all happening so fast. I know it's hard, but Dr. Cummings says the sooner we move her, the better. The facility has a spot available starting tomorrow. Tomorrow. Martin kept his voice neutral despite the alarm bells going off in his head. That seems rushed. Apparently, spots at good facilities don't stay open long. We're lucky they can take her. Martin nodded thoughtfully, already planning his next moves. You're right. We should do what's best for Teresa. Edward looked relieved. I'm glad you understand. I was worried you'd fight this. I just want what's best for her, Martin said, squeezing Teresa's hand gently. He felt her respond with a single, subtle squeeze, a confirmation that she'd heard everything. As Edward chatted about the transfer arrangements, Martin's mind was already working on a different kind of plan. These people had made a critical error. They'd underestimated both Teresa and him. They were about to learn that the Shepard family didn't go down without a fight. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Web. That night, Martin sat in his home office, a converted room filled with secure communication equipment, multiple monitors, and filing cabinets that contained the tools of his trade. His security consulting firm specialized in corporate intelligence and fraud investigation, skills that had served Fortune 500 companies well. Now, he'd use those same skills to save his niece. He started with Dr. Felipe Cummings. Within 2 hours, Martin had pulled the doctor's financial records, professional history, and personal background. What he found confirmed his suspicions. Cummings had been sued 3 times in the past 5 years for misdiagnoses related to brain injuries. Each case had been settled out of court with substantial payouts. More interesting was his recent financial activity, large deposits that didn't match his hospital salary, all coming from a company called Peaceful Transitions Care Facility. Martin dug deeper into Peaceful Transitions. On the surface, it appeared to be a legitimate long-term care facility specializing in severe brain injury patients. But the ownership structure was deliberately obfuscated through multiple shell companies. More damning was the facility's patient mortality rate, 30% higher than similar facilities, with most deaths occurring within the first month of admission. His phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Nurse Vincent. "Mr. Shepard? I'm sorry to call so late, but I'm working the night shift and thought you should know. They moved up Teresa's transfer. It's happening at 6 a.m. Martin's blood went cold. That's 4 hours from now. I overheard Dr. Cummings on the phone. He was telling someone that the situation needed to be expedited. Mr. Shepard, I've been a nurse for 23 years, and something about this whole thing feels wrong." "What do you mean?" Teresa's response is, "I've seen truly brain-dead patients, and she doesn't fit the profile. Sometimes I catch her eyes tracking movement. And yesterday, when I was adjusting her fore, I swear she tried to move her hand away." Martin closed his eyes. Nurse Vincent had noticed what Dr. Cummings had deliberately ignored. "Jeanette, I need you to do something for me, but it has to stay between us." "What kind of something?" "I need you to document every vital sign, every response, every detail about Teresa's condition between now and 6 a.m. Take photos if you can. And if anyone tries to give her medication that's not on a regular chart, call me immediately." There was a pause. "You think someone's deliberately misdiagnosing her?" "I think my niece tried to tell me something, and I'm starting to understand what." Martin spent the remaining hours before dawn preparing. He needed to move fast and smart. These people, whoever they were, had made their first mistake by accelerating their timeline. Desperation made people sloppy. At 5:30 a.m., Martin arrived at the hospital carrying a large coffee and wearing his most concerned uncle expression. He found Edward in the lobby, signing transfer papers. "I wanted to be here when they moved her," Martin said, keeping his voice heavy with resignation. To say goodbye, Edward looked relieved that Martin wasn't fighting the transfer. "The ambulance will be here in 20 minutes. Dr. Cummings said the facility is beautiful. Very peaceful." "I'm sure it is." Martin watched his brother sign document after document without reading them. A lot of paperwork for a simple transfer. "Insurance requirements," Edward said absently. Dr. Cummings' assistant helped me understand everything. Dr. Cummings appeared with a clipboard and a satisfied smile. "All set. The transport team will handle everything from here." "Actually," Martin said, "I was hoping to ride along, just to see where she'll be living." Dr. Cummings' smile flickered. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The transport is for medical personnel only. But you can visit once she's settled in." "Of course." Martin nodded understandingly. "When would that be?" "The facility prefers a 24-hour adjustment period. No visitors during that time." 24 hours. More than enough time for whatever they had planned. The transport team arrived. 2 men in medical uniforms who looked more like security guards than paramedics. As they prepared to move Teresa, Martin bent down and kissed her forehead. "I'll see you soon, kiddo," he whispered, then added quietly, "Don't give up. I'm coming for you." Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, meeting his. In that brief contact, Martin saw fear, but also determination. Teresa was still fighting. As the ambulance pulled away, Martin turned to his brother. "You're really okay with this?" Edward was already checking his phone. "It's for the best." Dr. Cummings explained that she'll be more comfortable there. "And the costs?" "Surprisingly reasonable." Dr. Cummings helped arrange some kind of special rate through the insurance. Martin nodded, filing away another piece of the puzzle. "Well, I guess that's that." But as Edward walked away, probably heading back to his normal life, Martin was already implementing the plan he'd formulated during the sleepless night. He had 12 hours before visiting hours opened at Peaceful Transitions. That was more than enough time to discover exactly what happened to patients who were transferred there, and why Dr. Cummings and his partners were so eager to get Teresa behind their doors. Martin Shepard had spent his career protecting people from threats they couldn't see coming. Now, someone had threatened his family. They were about to learn that was a mistake they'd regret for whatever time they had left. Chapter 4. Behind Enemy Lines. Martin spent the morning conducting reconnaissance on Peaceful Transitions Care Facility. Located on the outskirts of town, the building was modern but isolated, surrounded by landscape grounds that would make it difficult to approach undetected. More concerning was the security setup: cameras at every entrance, keycard access, and what appeared to be motion sensors along the perimeter. For a care facility, it was remarkably well protected. Using contact from his consulting work, Martin accessed public records and discovered that Peaceful Transitions had processed 47 vegetative state patients in the past 18 months. Of those, 31 had died within 6 weeks of admission. The official causes ranged from complications to pneumonia to cardiac events, all plausible for severely brain-injured patients, but the pattern was unmistakable. At 2 p.m., Martin arrived for visiting hours wearing a hidden camera and audio recorder. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Melissa Shepard, greeted him with practiced sympathy. "You must be Teresa's uncle. Dr. Cummings mentioned you be visiting. She's in our specialized care wing." Martin was escorted through corridors that felt more like a high-end hotel than a medical facility. Too quiet, too clean, too perfect. As they passed various rooms, he caught glimpses of patients lying motionless in beds, all connected to similar monitoring equipment. Teresa's room was at the end of the hall. She lay exactly as she had at the hospital, but something was different. Her color seemed worse, and new 4 lines had been added. "She's receiving our specialized treatment protocol," Melissa explained. Dr. Cummings designed it specifically for patients with severe brain trauma. "What kind of treatment?" "Nutritional support, medications to prevent complications, that sort of thing. Very advanced stuff." Martin nodded and took a seat beside Teresa's bed. "Could I have a few minutes alone?" "Of course. I'll be at the nurse's station if you need anything." Once alone, Martin quickly examined the 4 setup. One line contained a clear fluid he recognized as saline. The other contained something else, a milky substance he couldn't identify. He discreetly photographed both bags and their labels. "Teresa," he whispered, "can you hear me? 1 squeeze. Are they giving you something that makes you weaker? 1 squeeze. Do you know what it is?" 2 squeezes. Then her fingers began moving against his palm. Martin realized she was trying to spell something. He grabbed a pen and paper from his jacket. Letter by letter, Teresa spelled out SLOWPOSN. Martin's blood ran cold. They weren't just misdiagnosing patients. They were actively killing them, slowly enough to avoid suspicion. "How many others?" he asked. Teresa struggled to respond, her movements becoming more labored. The drugs were affecting her ability to communicate. Finally, she managed to squeeze his hand 3 times, then raised a shaking finger. 31. The same number Martin had found in the death records. "Uncle Martin?" Teresa's voice was barely a whisper, the first word she'd spoken since the stroke. They think I can't." "Save your strength," Martin said urgently. "I'm going to get you out of here." "Dad." "He knows," she breathed. "Sign papers. Gets money when I—" The pieces clicked into place. Edward wasn't just complicit, he was an active participant. He'd signed papers that would pay him when Teresa died, probably an insurance policy or some kind of legal settlement. "Mr. Shepard?" Melissa's voice called from the doorway. "Is everything all right?" Martin quickly pocketed his notes and returned to Teresa's side. "Just saying goodbye. It's hard to see her like this." Melissa entered with a syringe. "Time for her afternoon medication." "What kind of medication?" "Nutritional supplements. Helps prevent complications." Martin watched as Melissa prepared to inject the substance into Teresa's 4-line. Every instinct screamed at him to stop her, but he couldn't tip his hand yet. He needed more evidence, and he needed a plan that would expose everyone involved. "Actually," he said, standing up, "I think I should go. This is harder than I expected." Melissa paused. "Of course. Take your time processing everything." Martin kissed Teresa's forehead and whispered, "Hold on. I'm coming back for you tonight." Her eyes remained closed, but he felt the faintest squeeze of acknowledgement. That evening, Martin sat in his office with Luke Garner, his former military partner who now worked as a private investigator. Luke was one of the few people Martin trusted completely. They'd saved each other's lives more than once during their deployment in Afghanistan. "So let me get this straight," Luke said, reviewing the documents Martin had assembled. Your brother is working with this doctor to essentially murder your niece for insurance money. It's bigger than that. Martin pulled up the patient records on a screen. Look at the pattern. They're running a systematic operation. Dr. Cummings identifies patients with brain injuries, declares them vegetative regardless of their actual condition, then transfers them to this facility where they're slowly killed. Why not just let them die naturally? Because some of them might recover. Teresa's young and strong. She could potentially regain function with proper treatment. But if she's declared brain dead and dies in the facility, the insurance pays out immediately and no one asks questions. Luke studied the photos Martin had taken of the force setup. You think this milky substance is what's killing them? I think it's designed to cause gradual organ failure that looks like natural complications from brain injury. Perfect cover. What's your play? Martin leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. I'm going to expose every single person involved in this operation. And then I'm going to make sure they face consequences. Legal consequences? Among other things. Martin's smile was cold. But first, I need to get Teresa somewhere safe. And for that, I'm going to need your help. Luke grinned. Like old times. Exactly like old times. But with higher stakes. As they began planning Teresa's extraction, Martin felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he'd had before every successful mission in Afghanistan. The certainty that came from having superior intelligence, better training, and righteous purpose. Dr. Cummings and his co-conspirators had made their living preying on vulnerable patients and desperate families. They were about to discover what happened when they targeted the wrong family. Chapter 5. The Extraction. At 2:47 a.m., Martin Shepard moved through peaceful transitions like a ghost. His military training served him well as he navigated the security systems he'd spent the previous day studying. The facility's arrogance had made them sloppy. Their cameras had predictable blind spots, and their keycard system was a model he'd bypassed during a corporate security audit 2 years earlier. Luke waited in a modified van outside the facility's delivery entrance, monitoring police scanners and ready to provide extraction support. They had a 12-minute window between security rounds. Martin found Teresa's room exactly where he'd left her, but her condition had deteriorated noticeably. The drip had been increased, and her breathing was more labored. Whatever they were giving her was accelerating. Teresa, he whispered, disconnecting the poisonous line. Time to go. Her eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in days. Uncle Martin, I'm here, kiddo. We're getting you out. He carefully lifted her from bed, grateful for the hours he still spent in the gym maintaining his military fitness. Teresa was weak, but conscious, her arms wrapping around his neck. Can you walk? He asked. Little bit. Legs, getting stronger. The facility's layout worked in their favor. Teresa's room had direct access to a side corridor that led to the delivery entrance. As they moved through the shadows, Martin's earpiece crackled with Luke's voice. Security guard just entered the building. You've got maybe 3 minutes before he reaches your wing. Martin picked up the pace, half carrying Teresa through the final corridor. They reached the delivery door just as Luke pulled up in a van. Go, 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 Luke said as Martin loaded Teresa into the back of the van, which had been converted into a mobile medical unit. We've got company. Lights came on throughout the facility as they drove away. Martin knew they had minutes before Dr. Cummings was alerted and the real hunt began. Where are we going? Teresa asked, her voice stronger now that she was away from the poisonous four. Somewhere safe. A private medical facility owned by a friend of mine. Martin checked her pulse and blood pressure with equipment Luke had secured. Dr. Nina Fuentes is going to examine you properly. Uncle Martin? Teresa's hand found his. Dad really took money to kill me? The question hit Martin like a physical blow. I'm going to find out exactly what your father knew and when he knew it. I heard them talking yesterday. Dr. Cummings told him I'd be at peace within a week. Dad said he understood. Martin's jaw tightened. Edward hadn't just been complicit. He'd been an active participant in planning his daughter's murder. They arrived at Dr. Fuentes' private clinic 20 minutes later. Nina was an old friend from Martin's military days, a trauma surgeon who'd left the Army to run an independent practice that specialized in treating patients who'd fallen through the cracks of the regular medical system. Jesus, Martin, Nina said as she helped Teresa onto an examination table. What have you gotten yourself into? Exactly what I've always gotten myself into. Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Nina's examination took 2 hours. When she finished, her expression was grim but not defeated. She's been systematically poisoned with a cocktail designed to mimic the progression of brain injury complications, Nina reported. Whoever did this knows their neurochemistry. But the good news is that her actual brain function is largely intact. With time and proper treatment, she should make a full recovery. How long? Weeks, maybe months for complete recovery. But she's already improving just being off their drugs. Teresa was sitting up now, color returning to her face. Dr. Fuentes, I need to ask you something. In my medical training, we learned about consent forms for experimental treatments. Could someone use those to justify what they were doing to me? Nina and Martin exchanged glances. What kind of forms? Nina asked. I remember Dad signing a lot of papers. He said they were just transfer forms, but some of them looked different. Longer. Martin pulled out his phone and called Ralph Dunbar, a lawyer who specialized in medical malpractice and had helped Martin's consulting firm with several cases. Ralph, I need you to check something. Legal guardianship papers filed by Edward Shepard for his daughter Teresa. Specifically, anything related to experimental treatment or research participation. While Ralph searched legal databases, Martin outlined the situation. His lawyer's response was immediate and angry. Martin, if what you're describing is true, we're looking at multiple felonies. Medical fraud, insurance fraud, probably murder. What did you find in the papers? Edward Shepard signed consent forms authorizing experimental neurological treatments for his daughter. The forms specifically mention advanced pharmaceutical interventions and include clauses releasing the facility from liability for unexpected outcomes. Martin felt his anger crystallize into something colder and more focused. He gave them legal cover to kill her. That's exactly what he did. And according to the insurance documents attached to these filings, Edward stands to receive $500,000 in life insurance payouts plus a $200,000 settlement from a supposed malpractice case that doesn't actually exist. Teresa gasped. $700,000. That's what my life was worth to him. Martin knelt beside her bed and took her hand. Teresa, I need you to understand something. What happened to you wasn't random, and it wasn't just about money. Based on what I've found, they've done this to at least 30 other patients. This is organized, systematic murder disguised as medical care. Then we have to stop them? We're going to do more than stop them. We're going to make sure they face justice for every patient they've killed. Nina stepped forward. Martin, you need to take this to the police. With what evidence? A note from a patient they claim is brain dead? Financial records that could be explained as legitimate business transactions? Martin shook his head. They've been careful. The police would need more than what we have. So what's your plan? Martin's smile was sharp and predatory. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, the appearance that their plan worked, while I gather the evidence we need to bury them all. Teresa squeezed his hand. What do you need me to do? For now, get stronger. Learn to walk again, regain your strength. When the time comes, I'm going to need you to testify. But first, we need to make them think they won. Luke appeared in the doorway. Martin, we've got a problem. Someone just reported Teresa missing from the facility. Police are asking questions, and Dr. Cummings is claiming she was kidnapped. Martin had expected this. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted them to think. How is that perfect? Because desperate people make mistakes. And I'm about to give Dr. Cummings and my brother exactly the kind of pressure that makes people extremely desperate. As sirens wailed in the distance, Martin began implementing the second phase of his plan. The hunt was on, but Dr. Cummings and Edward Shepard didn't realize they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. Chapter 6. The hunter becomes the hunted. The news reports painted Martin as a delusional uncle who'd kidnapped his brain-dead niece from a legitimate medical facility. Dr. Cummings appeared on the morning news, expressing concern for Teresa's well-being and suggesting that grief had driven Martin to make an irrational decision. Mr. Shepard is clearly struggling with his niece's condition, Dr. Cummings told the sympathetic reporter. "We just want Teresa returned safely so she can receive the care she needs." Martin watched the broadcast from Dr. Fuentes' secure clinic, which was registered under multiple business names and effectively invisible to casual searches. Teresa sat beside him, stronger each hour as the poisons cleared her system. "He's good," Teresa admitted, watching her supposed doctor's performance. "If I didn't know the truth, I'd probably believe him." "That's what makes him dangerous," Martin replied. "But it's also what's going to bring him down." Edward had also appeared on the news, playing the role of the grieving father desperate to get his daughter back. His performance was less polished than Dr. Cummings's, but effective enough for public consumption. Martin's phone buzzed with a call from Detective Dave Marks, the lead investigator on Teresa's case. "Mr. Shepard, I need you to bring your niece back to the hospital immediately. What you've done constitutes kidnapping, regardless of your intentions. Detective Marks, before you arrest me, I need you to look at something." Martin activated a secure file-sharing app. "I'm sending you financial records, patient mortality data, and chemical analysis of the substances they were giving Teresa." "What kind of substances?" "Poisons designed to cause gradual organ failure." "Detective, my niece isn't brain dead. She was being murdered slowly, along with dozens of other patients." There was a long pause. "Mr. Shepard, those are serious accusations. They're about to become serious charges. Give me 24 hours to compile complete evidence, and I'll hand you the biggest medical fraud case this city has ever seen." "I can't give you 24 hours. There's an APB out for you and your niece." "Then meet me tonight. Warehouse District, the old Fisher Building. Come alone and bring someone from the DA's office. What I'm going to show you will end Dr. Cummings's career and put him in prison for the rest of his life." Martin ended the call and turned to Teresa, who'd been listening intently. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "If Detective Marks doesn't believe you, then we move to Plan B." Martin's expression was grim. "But I don't think it'll come to that. The evidence is too strong, and cops hate being lied to." At 10 p.m., Martin and Teresa arrived at the abandoned warehouse. Detective Marks was waiting with Assistant District Attorney Stephanie Hayden, a reputation for prosecuting complex fraud cases. "Ms. Hayden," Martin said, helping Teresa from the car, "I'd like you to meet the allegedly brain-dead victim of this conspiracy." Teresa stepped forward, moving carefully but clearly under her own power. "Detective Marks, my name is Teresa Shepard. 4 days ago, Dr. Felipe Cummings declared me vegetative and transferred me to a facility where they began poisoning me to death. The effect was immediate." Detective Marks stared, then looked at his notes, then back at Teresa. "The report said you had no higher brain function." "The reports were fabricated," Teresa replied. "I can tell you everything. Every conversation I overheard, every injection they gave me, every patient I saw them while out of that place in body bags." Martin opened his laptop and began presenting the evidence he'd assembled. Financial records showing payment from peaceful transitions to Dr. Cummings, patient mortality statistics, chemical analysis of the 4 substances, and recorded conversations he'd captured during his visits. "This is a systematic operation," Martin explained. "They target patients with brain injuries, falsified diagnoses, get families to sign consent forms for experimental treatment, then slowly kill the patients while collecting insurance payouts." ADA Hayden reviewed the documents with growing outrage. "How many victims are we talking about?" 31 confirmed deaths in 18 months. "And those are just the ones I could verify through public records." "What about Mr. Edward Shepard's involvement?" Detective Marks asked. Teresa spoke up, her voice stronger now. "My father knew. He signed consent forms for experimental treatment, knowing it would kill me. In exchange, he was set to receive $700,000 in insurance and settlement payments." "Can you prove that?" Martin produced the legal documents Ralph had discovered. "Everything's documented." Edward signed papers giving peaceful transitions the right to administer experimental drugs with no oversight. The insurance policies were taken out just 3 months ago, and the payout was contingent on Teresa dying within a specific time frame. ADA Hayden closed the file and looked at Detective Marks. "We need to move on this immediately." If they realize their operation has been exposed, they'll destroy evidence and disappear. What do you need from us? Martin asked. Teresa will need to give a complete statement and undergo medical examination by our forensic experts. Martin, you'll need to turn over all your evidence and cooperate fully with our investigation. Done. But I want protection for Teresa. These people have killed 31 patients. They won't hesitate to eliminate a witness. Detective Marks nodded. We'll put her in protective custody until we can make arrests. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Martin's phone rang. It was Dr. Cummings. Mr. Shepard, I understand you're upset about Teresa's condition, but this has gone far enough. You need to return her to our care immediately. Martin looked at Detective Marks, who nodded and gestured for him to put the call on speaker. Dr. Cummings, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Mr. Shepard, you don't understand the situation. Teresa requires specialized care that only our facility can provide. Without it, she could suffer serious complications. What kind of complications? Seizures, organ failure, cardiac events. Brain-injured patients are extremely fragile. Martin smiled coldly. Are you threatening my niece, doctor? There was a pause. I'm simply explaining medical realities. Bring her back tonight, and we can discuss this reasonably. Continue this path, and I can't guarantee her safety. The line went dead. Detective Marks looked at ADA Hayden. Was that a death threat? Hayden asked. Sounded like one to me, Teresa said, and I'm the intended victim. Martin felt satisfaction wash over him. In trying to threaten Teresa into returning, Dr. Cummings had just confessed to the conspiracy on a recorded line that Detective Marks had been monitoring. Detective, Martin said, I think you have enough evidence to move forward. More than enough. We'll have warrants by morning. But as they prepared to leave, Martin's instincts told him the night wasn't over. Dr. Cummings and his partners weren't the type to wait for police to arrive. They tried to clean up their loose ends tonight, which meant the real confrontation was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Trap. Dawn broke over the city as police surrounded Peaceful Transitions Care Facility. Detective Marks had secured warrants for Dr. Cummings, Facility Administrator Ralph Dunbar, and 3 staff members. But when they breached the building, they found it largely empty. They ran. Detective Marks reported to Martin over the phone. Took patient files, computer hard drives, everything. We got 8 patients here who appear to be in the same condition Teresa was in, but all the documentation is gone. Martin wasn't surprised. What about Edward? No sign of him either. His apartment's cleared out. Martin stood in Dr. Fuentes' clinic, watching Teresa work with a physical therapist. In just 24 hours off the poison, she'd regained significant motor function and mental clarity. Her recovery was proof of Dr. Cummings' deception, but it also meant they'd lost the element of surprise. They're going to disappear, Teresa said, overhearing the conversation. Start over somewhere else. Not if I can help it. Martin's expression was determined. Luke's tracking them through financial records and travel arrangements. And I've got other resources they don't know about. ADA Hayden arrived an hour later with disturbing news. We found evidence at the facility that confirms everything you suspected. Hidden cameras in patient rooms, detailed records of pharmaceutical doses, and payment receipts. But we also found something else. She handed Martin a file folder. Dr. Cummings kept detailed psychological profiles on family members. Edward's file indicates they'd been grooming him for months, identifying him as vulnerable to financial pressure. Martin read through his brother's psychological profile with growing disgust. The documents showed Dr. Cummings' team had researched Edward's gambling debts, failed business ventures, and desperate financial situation. They'd approached him with the proposal months before Teresa's stroke. They didn't just take advantage of the situation, Martin realized. They created it. What do you mean? Teresa gasped. Uncle Martin, my stroke. It happened after I had dinner with Dad. I felt sick that night, but I thought it was just stress from studying. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Martin's voice was deadly quiet when he spoke. They poisoned you to cause the stroke. ADA Hayden pulled out her phone. We need to test Teresa's blood for any remaining traces of stroke-inducing substances. But Martin was already thinking beyond the legal case. Dr. Cummings and Edward weren't just criminals. They were murderers who tried to kill a young woman for money. And now they were running, probably planning to set up their operation elsewhere. The legal system might take years to find them, if it ever did. But Martin had other options. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop pursuing this matter, or Teresa will suffer an unfortunate accident. We know where she is. Martin showed the message to Detective Marks, who immediately increased security around the clinic. But Martin knew police protection could only do so much against people willing to kill for money. I need to end this, he told Luke privately, before they disappear completely or try to hurt Teresa again. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Dr. Cummings and his partners made their living by exploiting people's trust in the medical system. Time to turn that advantage against them. Martin spent the afternoon implementing a plan that would draw his enemies out of hiding. Using his intelligence contacts, he leaked information suggesting that Teresa had died from complications related to her stroke, and that Martin had been arrested for interfering with her medical care. The fake news reports, planted in local media through carefully cultivated sources, painted a picture of Dr. Cummings as a vindicated medical professional and Edward as a grieving father who'd lost his daughter because of his brother's reckless actions. You think they'll believe it? Teresa asked, reviewing the fabricated news stories. Dr. Cummings is arrogant enough to think he won, and Edward's greedy enough to come back for his money. Martin's smile was predatory. They'll surface, and when they do, I'll be waiting. But Martin's real trap was more sophisticated than fake news stories. Using his access to financial tracking systems, he'd identified the offshore accounts where Dr. Cummings and his partners had been hiding their profits. With help from contacts in federal financial crimes units, Martin had flagged those accounts for suspicious activity monitoring. More importantly, he discovered that the conspiracy was larger than they'd initially realized. Peaceful Transitions was part of a network of facilities operating in 3 states, all using the same methods to kill vulnerable patients while collecting insurance payouts. We're not just dealing with one road doctor, Martin explained to ADA Hayden. This is organized crime disguised as healthcare. How many total victims? Potentially hundreds. We're going to need federal involvement. That evening, Martin's trap began to work. Luke reported that Edward had been spotted at a luxury hotel downtown, celebrating with champagne and apparently believing that Teresa's death had made him wealthy. He's not alone, Luke added. Dr. Cummings is with him, along with 2 other men I can't identify. Partners, probably. The ones running the other facilities. Martin checked his weapons and tactical gear. Time to crash their party. Martin, Teresa said as he prepared to leave. Be careful. These people have killed dozens of patients. They won't hesitate to kill you. They're welcome to try. Martin's expression was grim, but they picked the wrong family to target. As Martin headed into the night, he carried with him not just weapons and surveillance equipment, but also the recorded testimony of 8 patients from Peaceful Transitions who'd been conscious throughout their supposed vegetative states. Each had a story of being aware, but helpless, as they were slowly poisoned. Dr. Cummings and his partners had built their operation on the assumption that their victims couldn't fight back. They were about to learn what happened when they miscalculated. Chapter 8, Reckoning. The Grandview Hotel's penthouse suite buzzed with celebration. Edward Shepard raised a champagne glass, still wearing the black suit he'd donned for the fake media interviews about his deceased daughter. To successful partnerships, he toasted, looking around the room at Dr. Cummings and the 2 men Martin hadn't been able to identify through surveillance. Dr. Cummings smiled and raised his own glass. To problem solving. Martin Shepard could have been a serious complication, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the most elegant. You really think he'll stay quiet? Asked the older of the 2 strangers, a man with silver hair and expensive suit. Martin Shepard is facing federal kidnapping charges, Dr. Cummings replied. His reputation is destroyed, his business is under investigation, and his niece is dead. He has nothing left to fight with. What they didn't know was that Martin was listening to every word through surveillance equipment he'd planted in the suite that afternoon, while they were all attending Teresa's fake funeral. Luke's voice crackled through Martin's earpiece. You getting all this? Every word. Are the feds in position? Standing by. Agent Copeland, is monitoring from the building across the street. Martin had spent 2 days setting up this moment. The fake death certificate, the staged funeral, the planted surveillance equipment, all designed to make Dr. Cummings and his partners comfortable enough to discuss their operation openly. The beautiful thing about our model, Dr. Cummings was saying, is that it's completely scalable. We're already expanding into Colorado and Arizona. Brain injury patients are a renewable resource. Car accidents, sports injuries, workplace incidents. Americans generate dozens of potential victims every day. The silver-haired man nodded approvingly. And the insurance companies never question vegetative state diagnoses. Why would they? We're highly credentialed medical professionals making difficult diagnoses about complex cases. Who's going to challenge us? Grieving families who don't understand medicine. Edward laughed, already drunk on champagne and anticipated wealth. Martin always thought he was smarter than everyone else. Military this, intelligence that. But he couldn't outsmart a simple business arrangement. Speaking of which, the second stranger said, "Your payment has been transferred. $700,000, as agreed." Edward checked his phone and grinned. "Beautiful. And there's no way this can be traced back to us." "Edward, my friend," Dr. Cummings said, "Teresa died of complications from stroke. You're receiving legitimate insurance payouts and a settlement from a sadly unsuccessful treatment attempt. Everything is perfectly legal and documented." Martin had heard enough. He activated the signal that would bring law enforcement into the building while he moved toward the penthouse from his position on the roof. But as he prepared to descend through the access hatch he'd opened earlier, his earpiece crackled with urgent news from Luke. "Martin, we've got a problem. 3 armed men just entered the hotel through the service entrance. They're not police." Martin's blood chilled. "Security cameras? I'm watching now. They're heading for the penthouse level. Professional movements, tactical gear." The conversation in the suite had changed tone. Dr. Cummings was speaking urgently into his phone. "What do you mean there's no body? How can there be no body?" Martin realized their deception had been discovered. Someone had checked on Teresa's supposed death and found inconsistencies. "Sir," one of the strangers was saying, "if the girl is still alive, then we have a significant problem," Dr. Cummings finished. "And problems require solutions." Edward's drunken celebration turned to panic. "What are you talking about?" "Teresa's dead. I saw the death certificate." "Death certificates can be fabricated, Edward, just like diagnoses." Dr. Cummings's mask was slipping, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "The question is whether Martin Shepard is clever enough to fake his niece's death. And if he is," Edward asked. The silver-haired man answered, "then Martin Shepard becomes a liability that needs to be eliminated." Martin dropped through the roof access into a utility corridor. The 3 armed men Luke had spotted were clearly not police. They were hired killers, probably brought in to clean up the loose ends that Martin and Teresa represented. But Martin had prepared for this possibility. His tactical training kicked in as he moved through the building's service areas, using the architectural plans he'd memorized to stay ahead of the search team. His phone vibrated with a text message. "We know you're here, Shepard. Surrender now and your niece lives. Keep running and she dies tonight." Martin smiled grimly and typed back, "Come and get me." The next few minutes would determine whether his months of planning and preparation had been enough. But as he heard footsteps moving through the corridors below, Martin felt the familiar calm that came with the approach of combat. Dr. Cummings and his partners had made a living by preying on the helpless. They were about to face someone who was anything but helpless. The hunt was on, but now Martin Shepard was the predator. Chapter 9. Justice Served. The penthouse suite erupted in chaos as federal agents burst through the main entrance while Martin dropped from the ceiling access panel directly into the room. The 3 hired killers found themselves caught between FBI agent Gary Copeland's team coming up the stairs and Martin's tactical expertise from above. "Federal agents. Nobody move," Agent Copeland shouted, but Dr. Cummings was already reaching for a briefcase that Martin suspected contained more than medical documents. Martin landed silently behind the doctor and grabbed his wrist. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Dr. Cummings spun around, his polished veneer completely gone. "You're supposed to be in jail." "Funny thing about that," Martin said, maintaining his grip on the doctor's arm. Turns out kidnapping charges are hard to make stick when the victim testifies that she was being murdered. Edward backed against the window, his face pale. Martin, I can't explain. Explain what? That you sold your daughter's life for $700,000. Martin's voice was ice cold. That you signed papers authorizing them to poison her to death. The silver-haired man tried to make a run for the emergency exit, but FBI agents were waiting. As he was taken down, his briefcase spilled open, revealing dozens of fake medical documents and insurance forms. Ralph Dunbar, Agent Copeland announced, reading from the man's identification. Administrator of Peaceful Transitions in 2 other facilities in Colorado and Arizona. Mr. Dunbar, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. Dr. Cummings looked around the room desperately. This is ridiculous. I'm a licensed physician. These accusations are... Dr. Cummings, a new voice interrupted. Teresa Shepard stepped into the room, walking steadily despite everything she'd endured. I'd like you to meet my friend from medical school. Behind Teresa came Dr. Mike Ayers, a federal medical examiner who'd been documenting the evidence of systematic poisoning. Dr. Cummings, Dr. Ayers said formally, I've completed analysis of the substances you were administering to Teresa Shepard and 7 other patients. The cocktail includes neurotoxins specifically designed to mimic stroke complications while causing gradual organ failure. Dr. Cummings's face went white. That's impossible. I've never. We also found your research notes, Teresa added. Detailed documentation of drug combinations, timing protocols, and patient selection criteria. You kept very thorough records for someone committing random acts of medical malpractice. Martin watched his niece face down the man who tried to kill her. There was no fear in her expression, only determination and the kind of steel that ran in the Shepard family bloodline. You made one critical mistake, Doctor, Teresa continued. You assumed I was helpless. But while you were poisoning me, I was studying you, learning your patterns, memorizing conversations, gathering evidence. She pulled out a small digital recorder, including this recording from yesterday, when you called Ralph Dunbar to discuss accelerating the timeline for remaining loose ends. As federal agents processed the arrests, Martin pulled Edward aside. His brother looked broken, the reality of his actions finally sinking in. Martin, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. You signed papers authorizing experimental treatment that you knew would kill your daughter. What did you think would happen? I was desperate. The gambling debts, the business loans, they were going to kill me if I didn't pay. So you decided to let them kill Teresa instead. Edward's shoulders sagged. I thought she was already gone. The stroke was so severe, and Dr. Cummings said she'd never recover. She was never brain dead, Edward. Every day you visited, every time you signed another form, she was aware. She heard you planning her death. The weight of that knowledge crushed what remained of Edward's composure. God, what have I done? You betrayed your daughter for money, and now you're going to prison for it. As Edward was led away in handcuffs, Martin felt no satisfaction, only sadness for what his brother had become. 3 weeks later, Martin sat in a federal courthouse listening to ADA Hayden present the government's case against Dr. Cummings and his co-conspirators. The evidence was overwhelming. 47 confirmed murder victims across 3 states, millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims, and a network of medical professionals who perverted their oath to do no harm into a systematic killing machine. Teresa testified via video link, her recovery serving as living proof of the conspiracy's scope. Her testimony was devastating, describing not only her own experience, but also the other patients she'd observed being slowly murdered. I watched them kill Mrs. Elena Vega in the room next to mine, Teresa said, her voice steady despite the traumatic memories. She'd been trying to spell words with her fingers for days, but the staff ignored her. Then one night, they increased her 4 dosage, and by morning she was dead. Dr. Cummings's defense attorney tried to argue that the deaths were natural complications, but the chemical evidence was irrefutable. The drug cocktail found in patient systems had no legitimate medical purpose except to cause death, while mimicking natural causes. Ralph Dunbar turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing details about the network's expansion plans and victim selection criteria. His testimony revealed that they'd been targeting not just stroke patients, but also elderly patients with dementia and veterans with traumatic brain injuries. The business model was simple, Dunbar testified. Identify vulnerable patients with substantial insurance coverage, obtain legal consent from desperate family members, then eliminate the patients while collecting maximum payouts. Edward received 15 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Dr. Cummings and his main partners received life sentences without possibility of parole. The other facilities were shut down, and 43 surviving patients were transferred to legitimate care facilities. Martin stood outside the courthouse with Teresa, who was now walking with only a slight limp and had been readmitted to medical school with full honors. "How do you feel?" he asked. Like justice was served, but also sad for all the patients who didn't have an Uncle Martin to fight for them. "That's why I'm starting a foundation," Martin said. "Patient advocacy for brain injury victims. Making sure something like this never happens again. Using the money from Dr. Cummings's seized assets. Every penny. Seems appropriate that his profits should go toward protecting the people he tried to kill." As they walked down the courthouse steps, Teresa took her uncle's arm. "Thank you for believing in me when everyone else had given up." "I didn't just believe in you," Martin replied. "I knew you." The Teresa Shepherd I raised doesn't quit, doesn't surrender, and definitely doesn't let anyone else decide her fate, even when she's supposedly brain dead. Especially then. 6 months later, the Shepherd Foundation had opened its first patient advocacy center, staffed by medical professionals, lawyers, and investigators dedicated to protecting vulnerable patients from predatory medical practices. Martin had left his consulting firm to run the foundation full-time, turning his military and intelligence skills toward a new mission. Teresa finished her medical degree with distinction and joined the foundation as its chief medical officer, specializing in brain injury recovery and patient rights. Her own experience had given her insights into patient care that no textbook could teach. The foundation's first case involved a network of nursing homes in Texas that were over-medicating elderly patients to reduce care costs. The second involved a rehabilitation center that was declaring brain injury patients untreatable to maximize insurance reimbursements. Apparently, Teresa told Martin, as they reviewed case files, "There are more Dr. Cummings out there than we realized." "Then we'll find them," Martin replied, his expression carrying the same cold determination that had driven him to save Teresa. All of them. In the end, Dr. Cummings's operation had been built on a fundamental miscalculation. They'd assumed their victims were helpless, voiceless, and forgotten. They'd counted on families being too grief-stricken or financially desperate to ask hard questions. But they'd made the mistake of targeting Teresa Shepherd, whose uncle had spent his career protecting people from threats they couldn't see coming. And they'd underestimated both the young woman who'd refused to die quietly and the man who'd refused to let her. Martin Shepherd had always believed that the measure of a person wasn't how they handled easy times, but how they responded when everything went wrong. Looking at Teresa as she worked with their newest case, a veteran who'd been declared vegetative after a training accident, Martin knew they'd both passed that test. Some fights were worth everything you had to give, and some victories were worth the price you paid to achieve them. Teresa was alive. Dr. Cummings was spending life in prison, and dozens of other potential victims would be protected by the foundation they'd built from the ashes of a conspiracy designed to kill the helpless. In Martin's experience, that was about as close to perfect justice as the real world allowed. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.